error occurred. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Demystify Selling with Microsoft. And I'm super excited for my guest today, Mike Weinberg. Mike, welcome.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. And for those that don't know Mike, he is a consultant, coach, speaker, and best-selling author, which is how I got introduced to Mike, is through his latest book, the right behind me there. It was a fantastic book, and I wanted to invite Mike on today and talk through that book. But before we do that, Mike, maybe you can take a minute and just introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit more about yourself and where you come from. It'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. What a treat to be with you. Appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for the nice display of the book in the background there. Publisher and I both thank you for that. I am a sales guy turned consultant, coach, and best-selling author from New York, but I've lived in St. Louis for 30 years. So I've lost most of my jerk and most of my accent, although both come back when I'm being interviewed. So we'll see whether that kind of sneaks in to our dialogue. I met my best friend and my wife here in St. Louis, and people joke that Katie is absolutely the best proof that I can sell, because nobody that meets us both thinks that she got the better deal here. That was quite the sales job.
That's
and
awesome.
I've got 3 young adult kids, not as young, still in their 20s though, and 1 grandchild who is perfect, my perfect granddaughter.
Nice.
And in business, my passion is helping salespeople and sales teams win more new sales. And I do that really just focusing in 2 areas. And I really stick to my swim lanes, stick to my knitting. I help sales teams become more proficient at developing new business. And my first book, New Sales Simplified, is what put me on the map and why people know who I am. That book is selling more than ever after 11 years on the market. So I spent a lot of time with sales teams on being proactive, on creating opportunities at the top of the funnel, success, developing new business. And then I work with sales leaders, whether they're senior execs or they're frontline managers, to radically ramp up sales management effectiveness. And probably at this point, because of the multiplier effect from sales management, and when you get that right, what happens? I mean, it's transformative. Probably 2/3 of my effort right now, my client work, whether it's training or ongoing engagements or cohorts, is around sales leadership effectiveness. So it's kind of my idea right there.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, I wish I'd found you 10 years ago, because I feel like my journey would have been collapsed after reading this latest book and your last book. So I'm super excited to kind of dig into that. If you're all set, let's jump in.
Yeah, let's go.
So the first thing I want to do is, right out of your book, I think it was in chapter 2 or 3, was this quote, and it just struck me, which is, the shift to sales management changes everything. And you're no longer just responsible for yourself. You're almost no longer viewed as an individual. And maybe you could unpack that quote for me, because it just hit me so hard.
Of the 30 interviews I've done about this book, you're the first person to pull that quote out. And I love that you grabbed that, because it's the truth. And for some people, it's a surprise.
Right.
And I like to say it like this. I often tell sales leaders, particularly newer sales leaders, that the only thing similar about your new job in leadership and management and your old job as an individual contributor selling, the only similarity is the word sales, because the jobs are polar opposites. And, you go from being responsible for one, where you're the individual, which is where this quote comes from, versus being responsible for many. And you go from winning on your own to having to win through your people.
Right.
And you go from when you can be really selfish and protective of your time, because that's what top producers are. They're selfish and they're competitive and they keep other people away. Well, you can't do that when you're the leader, because you win through your people.
Right.
And then the whole ego conversation we'll get to in a minute, but ego is something pretty healthy on a salesperson. In fact, I encourage a little bit of a high ego, as long as you're not a prima donna or arrogant with your clients.
Right.
But high ego and wanting the credit as the team leader, that gets old really fast. And the reality, and I don't know how to say it, that shift is massive. And it was hard for me. And it's hard for a lot of people to realize you're not an individual anymore. You don't get to go up on the stage. It's not about you getting the glory. You don't even really have your own number anymore. Your number is the collection of your team's numbers.
Right.
And that, that's a radical shift. So I'll pause there, but it's something I'm spending a lot of time with newer managers, helping them see it's not about you.
Right.
you got to win through your people.
Yeah, and I think that you touched on there the ego, and I think that I read in the book too. Like you called it the hero mode. It's like you've got to move out of that mode, and you're no longer the person, and that's such a big shift. And I think that in the community I work in and the people I work with, we see salespeople being promoted all the time, and then just falling flat on their face. And it's such a shift that I really wanted to bring this up and have you sort of talk through it with us.
Yeah, well, you started going down the path of the hero. I mean, that topic is so important. I gave it its own chapter.
Yeah.
The title, it's chapter 5 in the book, and the title is Bad Things Happen When You Try to Do Your Salespeople's Jobs.
Right.
And what's natural, and this is where it gets really tricky. A lot of the time, that top producer, that high performing salesperson who's a candidate for leadership and gets promoted into a management role, right? They're used to winning. They're used to doing whatever it takes to get something done. And that's a good trait, right? We want people who
Right.
want to win, who will run through walls. If it's going to happen, it's on me. I get it. But they take that same attitude with them into the management role. So
Mhm.
what happens is, I call it playing the team hero instead of being focused on making your people into heroes. So the leader ends up doing instead of coaching, or
Right.
doing instead of leading, or doing instead of holding someone else accountable. And it sounds good in the short term. I'll jump in, I'll get it done. I'll be there for the big presentation. I'll
Yeah.
rewrite the proposal. I'll be over prescriptive in the pre-call coaching. I'll stand up and report the results. I'll even go tell the VP, it was me, boss. I jumped in, I saved the day. My team was all messed up, and I went in there in the last minute and I fixed the presentation and I delivered it and I did the negotiation and I closed it. Which, it's nice that you won, but the real question the sales exec should be asking that sales manager is, why don't you tell me why you got in that situation in the first place? And is it possible you don't have the right talent on your team, or maybe you're not coaching them in the first place? Like, why did you have to do everything? And
Right.
this hero mentality manifests itself. It kills the culture. It
Yeah.
sometimes neuters the salesperson in front of the customer, because the manager becomes the key, and the salesperson, the rep, is a pawn, right? Who
Right.
becomes useless to the customer. Um, in some ways, I've seen this. You create codependent salespeople that are scared to do anything without you, because you're the micromanager freak who's got to have your fingerprints and everything. And that's,
Yeah.
nobody wants to work for that guy or that
Right.
gal. That's
Oh
not fun.
no.
And I'll just say this part of the hero thing. I get why people do it, because they did
Yeah.
it as individual contributors. They feel the pressure to win. It could be the way the company operates, that they put a lot of pressure on the managers to go in and get it done. Sometimes they do it because it's the ego. Sometimes it's because they're perfectionistic control freaks. Sometimes, even more dangerous, the manager knows that they don't have sufficient talent on the team. They're
Yeah.
looking at their people, right? And instead of doing the responsible thing, trying to coach them up, or if you have to coach them out, they're like, I don't want to deal with that. I'll just go sell. So they go catch the fish instead of
Yeah.
teaching someone to fish, because it's more expedient. And you add all those causes together, and you have a lot of managers that are trying to do 5 people's jobs, which is, by the way, not sustainable and definitely not scalable. So that there's a lot in
Right.
that hero conversation.
There is, and I think I mean those 2 points right there, just not sustainable. I mean, it's you just can't. You can't. You'll run yourself ragged. You won't. You won't be doing your team service. You won't be doing the individuals on your team any service, and then you just can't scale. I mean, you can't
Oh,
build the
no.
kind of industry class sales team in that way.
Well, there's multiple ramifications. I mean, you just said one of them. You can't build a world-class team, because no top producer wants to work for you if you want all the glory and you're the hero
Right.
and you're a micromanager. So that's a given. But I'll tell you the flip side. It's wrecking the manager. One,
Yeah.
you become unpromotable, because
Yeah.
leadership sees that you're just running around like a chicken with your head cut off. You're not leading anybody anywhere. You're not developing people. You're just a glorified doer, right? So
Mhm.
there's part one. But here's the other consequence. You're killing yourself.
Yeah.
Quality of life, sleep, relationships at home. When you set your job up that you got to do 5 people's jobs, well, when are you going to breathe? Don't you have your own work to do? And you get in this, like, I don't know how you say it, an unending, like, perma cycle, where you jump in,
Yeah.
play the hero, you keep doing, and then you're inserted in every opportunity, every situation. You can't extricate yourself from that. And it's not like you're not already working 50 or 60 hours plus. it's not like you're not getting 234 emails a day from the CFO, from
Right.
marketing, from the executives. So where are you going to do your job when you're trying to do other people's jobs? It leads to burnout and overwhelm, and managers would do well to call time out and pause and evaluate whether they're doing or they're leading, because there's a very big difference.
Yeah, and it's such a vicious cycle that you can get yourself into, and it's self-perpetuating. Once you're in there, you're like, oh, I'm just going to hand it off to you, and
Very challenging.
I know you're going to do it. So yeah. Well, then let's transition a little bit and talk about if I'm a new manager, I'm just stepping into the role of sales manager. What's the number one thing I should be thinking about? What's the number one sort of activity that I should be focused on as a first time sales manager, or for that matter, any sales
Any
manager, in
sales
my
manager. Yeah,
opinion?
it's great.
What is that from your perspective, Mike?
Let me say this as an overarching theme, and then I want to get into the two highest impact activities of a sales manager. But from an overarching perspective, thematically, we need to get to know our people,
Yeah,
because we need to treat people like adults and manage them differently. And I don't see managers taking enough time to get to know folks and what makes them tick so they can manage them appropriately. And I'll later in this conversation, I'll touch on even my advocacy that we should discriminate, not based on race or gender, right, or religion, but based on performance. And if you're really going to treat
mhm,
your best people differently because they've earned it and they've earned more support, you need to know what makes them tick and how you can better support and encourage and challenge them. So you got to get to know everybody.
yeah,
But specifically to your question, what should I be doing? I am absolutely convinced that we really have two levers to push and pull as sales leaders. These are the two highest impact, highest payoff things we can do as a sales manager. One is accountability, and two is coaching. And the way I articulated it in the book, the first couple chapters were set up and we talked about some of the things you and I already addressed. You have the most important job in the revenue organization. That's great. Congratulations. You also
mhm,
have the hardest job.
yeah,
And then the second chapter, we talked about this transition, pivoting from winning on your own to winning through your people, and that the two jobs couldn't be more different.
yeah,
The first chapter where I actually give advice is chapter 3. And basically the title of that chapter is your most important job, your primary job is making sure that their people do their job.
yeah,
And that's accountability. And you and I were joking in the pre-show, like this is an underappreciated, undervalued topic.
yeah,
It's not sexy. Nobody's writing about accountability on LinkedIn, right?
yeah.
In the sales world, they're talking about cadences and tech and toys, and no one's talking about what does good accountability look like, where you shove a sales report under a sales rep's nose, and then you dive into the pipeline, and not for coaching and deal strategy, but for like, hey, is there enough in here? We got coverage based on our normal win rate and what you're projecting. Are there enough deals in here for you to make your number for the month and for the quarter? And oh, by the way, what did you create last month? I know you're ahead of quota, but in the last 30 days, what'd you put in the funnel? What's
Mhm.
new in the pipe? And of those longer deals, which did you advance? And those types of just solid questions, and realizing that sales is about results,
Yeah,
and then it's not inappropriate and it's not wrong and it's not politically incorrect to publish a sales report. And then once a month, sit down for a few minutes, not for emotional reasons, but just for data, to examine what someone's actually producing, what they're working on producing, the pipeline. And then if that's not good, then we got to dive into their activity. And I'll talk through that framework with you a little bit more. But you asked, what's the number one? It's accountability. And then I would say the second most important thing we would do is coach and help our people do better. But I am one of those people that strongly believes, and I preach this to anyone who will listen, that these are completely separate functions. And
yeah,
in a one-on-one meeting, you should not be doing accountability and coaching, because they have different purposes and they serve a different function. And the best accountability meetings are really short and they're focused on one thing: holding someone accountable, looking at their results,
yeah.
the health and condition of their pipeline, and only when necessary, their activity level.
Right. And well, I love that you just pointed that out, that you look at the results first and you sort of clearly it's black and white. Here it is. These are the results. And we're not, we don't have to overanalyze it. We don't have to, try and figure it is what it is. But then it's that you take the step to say, what's the next thing to do? If they're doing great and they're hitting their numbers, just move on. If they're not, let's move down to the next level and look at activity. And again, the activity just becomes the numbers again. Are you having, I'm assuming this is what you mean by that, is that, are you meeting with the right people? Are you connecting with partners? Which is very important in my world, in the Microsoft world, is having those types of activities in your sort of day-to-day world is so critical.
100%. You explain that beautifully, better than I do. And what I would say is the beauty of this framework, and I'm going to credit my mentor, and I've written about him in almost every book, a gentleman named Donnie Williams, who is the best sales leader I've ever seen. And I worked for him way back in the 1990s, and then we were business partners in the 2000s. He understood that nobody wants to be asked about their activity. Nobody wants to be micromanaged. I mean, I'm in sales for the 3 Fs. 3 Fs: fun, freedom, financial rewards, right? And and of all those, freedom might be the biggest one.
For sure.
But there's a reality that we all know this. Pipeline is the lifeblood of the business. And where Donnie was so brilliant, he created this framework. I just stole it and made it popular, but he would sit me down once a month and he'd be like, Mike, how you doing? Actually, I'll show you how you're doing. Let's look at the sales report. Here's where you rank on the team. Here's where you are against last year. Here's where you are against goal. And where he was so smart was we'd only spend a minute or two on results. It was all data, never angry, never threatening, never raising his voice, but let's look at where you stand. The numbers are the numbers. Sales is about results.
Yeah.
Part of the genius, though, in how we did this, we never lingered on results because you can't change them. It's old news. It's yesterday. Like, it is what it is. Where we spent most of the time in an accountability meeting was on the pipeline, which I like to say is the lifeblood of the business. This is tomorrow's cash flow. These are tomorrow's deals. So if I'm advocating you spend 10 or 15 minutes per person once a month in a formal accountability meeting like this, 75% of that's spent on the pipeline. Is there enough in here? Do we have enough coverage? What did we add and what did we create? And even if a salesperson's struggling with their results, if you're looking at the pipeline and it's healthy and it's chock full of deals and new deals are being added and things aren't getting stale and growing mold and we're moving deals forward, I'm not asking a salesperson about their activity because the pipeline is what I care about.
Right.
However, if we look in the pipe and it's not there, and you can look at the salesperson, they look at you and go, if we're being honest with each other, you're not making your number this month or this quarter, because even if you closed 100% of these deals and we closed about a third normally, we're not winning. Like, you can't, so we're behind. And now I advocate that managers would move this meeting to the third, and this is the least pleasant phase, but it's necessitated at this point. If results aren't there and pipeline's not there, I like to look at the salesperson and go, listen, I'm not cool with you failing. I don't see the results. We both agree the pipeline's not sufficient. Why don't you grab your calendar and open the CRM and grab your business plan and let's look at your target account list? Because here's my question. What did you do last month? Right. And show me the proactive behaviors against this target account list that we agreed you'd pursue. And not only am I so concerned, I'm going to look at what your activity was, but would you like to show me what your plan is for the next few weeks? Because the results ain't there and the pipeline's weak. You've really left me no choice but to dig into this. I don't like going here, but I have no choice right now. And the magic of that flow, results, pipe, and then activity, is everyone understands once you get to activity, you've been forced to go there. It's not by choice. Yeah. And that's why it's not micromanagement.
Yeah, there's really no arguing. If you're looking at it's black and white, if I see we both see the results aren't there and we both see that the pipeline's not there, then let's look at the calendar. And the calendar tells all in my mind. It's like, if you're not meeting in front of the right people, you're never going to generate that pipeline. So
beautiful. 100%.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that as a manager, you talk about these meetings and then you flow into coaching. And let's, before we get into coaching, just dig on the structure of those meetings. We talked about results, pipeline, activity. Well, how do you coach somebody up from that? So you mentioned, coach up or coach out. So let's talk a little bit about coaching up and what that looks like.
Yeah, it's a big topic and it's not a happy topic, right? In fact, it's something that's avoided by a lot of managers at all costs. Mm-hmm. And Rob, what I'd say is, if you're doing a regular results and pipeline focused accountability meeting, mm-hmm. after several months, and whatever several means, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 5, and you're meeting with an underperformer. In the book, I use the name Johnny, just for example, as an underperformer. And you're meeting with Johnny and something isn't clicking, because that accountability meeting wakes people up. They know we're serious about results. We're serious about pipeline. And 3, 4, 5 months in a row, you're having this meeting and the results and the pipeline are not changing. The question I now ask the manager is, you know what the definition of insanity is, right? Like you're doing the same thing over and over and we're not getting a different result. We need to change the conversation. And what I'll tell you is I am regularly pushing on sales leaders about more quickly calling out and identifying underperformance,
Mhm.
because you can't win and you kill your culture when you leave someone in the role failing, which is what failing, struggling, not making your number is pass fail in sales. You're failing. If you let that person go unaddressed, and I'm not saying to fire them, and I'm not even saying to put them on a PIP. This isn't a legal or an HR conversation. This is, you're the team leader, you manage sales, someone on your team isn't pulling their weight. How long do you let that go before you say, hey, stop? And you actually confront it and say, we got to get this turned around.
Yeah.
And when I push sales leaders on that, I typically get like, Mike, you don't understand. Like, what don't I understand? Mike, you don't understand what it's like around here, and I can't find anybody. And if I sit down with Johnny and I put him on the spot and say, we got to get this turned around, even if I'm offering to help him, he might start looking for a job. And I look at them with this quizzical look, and I'm like, your point? And
Right.
because he's already failing and you're afraid to put pressure on him to get him turning around, you're afraid he's going to leave. And like, well, Mike, you don't understand. If he leaves, I'm going to get all the phone calls. And then I got the hassle because, I haven't built a bench of new hires, which is also a best practice. They're not interviewing or recruiting perpetually. So they're starting from scratch. And then once I get this new person, they're all green. I got to get them onboarded. I got to train them. I got to orient them. They're no good for 6 months. So why would I want to have this hard conversation with Johnny? And when I hear that, I want to grab their neck.
It's like,
I'm like, do you understand what you're saying? You've abdicated your role. Like, you have fiduciary responsibility to the company, to the business, to yourself, even a Johnny to tell me he's failing. Like, what good is that? And so that's malpractice. And the title of that chapter, and it's probably of 4 books, and I don't know, do the math. I probably have 65, 70 chapters written in those 4 books. This is the single most prescriptive chapter. It's chapter 8. And it says it's sales management malpractice to ignore underperformance. And I've never been so granular or prescriptive in terms of how to confront the person, how to have the conversation, what you offer to do. Because I'm not saying you got to call HR or you put someone on a PIP, which always feels like just an automatic, the beginning of termination. What I'm saying is, as the leader, you do your job and you sit down, Johnny, you go, Johnny, I think you want to succeed, but the path we're on's not working. We got to change this trajectory. I'm going to help you. And over the next couple months, I'm doubling up my coaching and I'm doubling up my accountability with you. But I need a commitment that you're gonna go at it. And here's what I need from you in terms of pipeline and results. Are you in with me? Let's get this going the right direction. And I call that coaching up, which is what you do before you coach out. And here's the beautiful thing. The end result of initiating this coach up conversation is always good. Either after a few months of your intense help, extra accountability, extra coaching, and Johnny's commitment, you did it. At least temporarily, you saved him, and he's now producing at an acceptable level. You might have turned his whole career around. That's awesome.
Right.
Or, after a couple months, didn't work. With extra pressure, accountability, you still got nothing. And now you go the legal route, whatever you got to do to move Johnny on. But what I'm saying, managers, why don't you have this conversation? Why do you wait so long? Because nobody's benefiting, not Johnny, not the company, not the clients, not you, by letting this go. And that's part of my message. That's coaching up or coaching out. And the last thing I'll say about this, aside from the fact that the end result's always good because you get your answer, and maybe it's a third of the time you save the person, that's not a bad percentage. I feel like you owe it to them to try.
For sure. Yeah.
If you sit down the underperformer to start doing a coach up and you're articulating, listen, I'm looking at your results. We've had these meetings for months. You're not turning it around as we both wanted you to. I'm going to help you, but I need a commitment. And if Johnny kind of thumbs his nose at you, is like, I'm not that interested in your extra coaching and accountability. At that point, I think he's telling you all you need to know.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what do you do with that? So I really appreciate you asking about this topic because it's the least pleasant thing we do as sales leaders.
Yeah, but I also think it's a little bit of a lost art. I think that, and I grew up, I've been in the sales arena for 20 plus years. And, early on, I was lucky to have some great mentors and coaches that sat me down and said, like, look, we're going to have a hard conversation. And, I thank them every day for that now. I mean, I would have never been anywhere near close to where I am today had I not had some.
Same here. And I even, in the chapter, I tell a story of a senior executive at one of my $1 billion clients who stood up in the room when I was teaching this about confronting underperformance. He said, Mike, sit down. I'm like, okay. And he looked out at the room and he said, I want you all to know something. This thing that Mike's talking about, I was Johnny. He said, I was a new employee in this company. The only person that knows the story is the CEO sitting right over there in the corner. And I was kind of slacking. And my
Yeah.
first sales manager sat my ass down and said, I expect more from you. You're better than this. You're not
Yeah.
trying. You got to learn the product. You need to run better sales calls. I'm going to jump in your car more. We're going to do some work. I have higher expectations for you. Are you going to take this to a new level? Otherwise, we're having a different conversation. And this guy looked out at his team and he's like, I was Johnny. Like, if that's not the best example of telling someone the truth, even in love,
Yeah.
because they're failing and you got to tell them you're failing. Let's get this going the right direction. What is? So it's malpractice to ignore it. You've got to tackle it and you're going to figure it out one way or the other. But turning your other way, turning a blind eye, that doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't get anybody anywhere. I mean,
No,
I'm so thankful for that, and I know that if I can ever return that favor to salespeople, it's the
totally.
first thing I want to do is like, look, you can do it. You've got everything you need. You just have
100%.
to invest. So, well, Mike, this has been an amazing conversation. As we're wrapping up, though, if you had to leave our audience with one sort of final takeaway or one thing to just remember, implement today, what would that be from your perspective?
I think it's a simple point that if you're in leadership, you're the key. You have a lot more control. You have free agency. Even if you work in a crazy environment and the biosphere around you or above you is chaotic, you as the team leader can create the culture that you're responsible for. And you are the key to creating that healthy high performance culture and you're the key to driving results. But you got to get your time back where you're spending the vast majority of what you do on those precious few sales leadership activities that move the needle. And I will make the case until I'm in my grave that the two highest things you could do, payoff things you could do, are accountability and
Yeah.
coaching. And if you spent the vast majority of your time looking at results and helping people see where they stand, and then investing at least half of your calendar in developing your people so they're more proficient at their job, you're going to win
Yeah.
and you're going to have
Yeah.
a lot more fun.
Absolutely. That is great advice. And I think that you summed it up there perfectly. But for anyone that hasn't, I encourage you to get the book. That is, for me, I wish I'd have had this book yet right there. Thank you. I wish I had this book, like I said, 10 years ago. But if people want to learn more about Mike and what you do, where would they go? What's the best
Oh, Rob,
place?
first of all, thanks for having me. And what great questions. You asked me one or two things I haven't been asked, which is so much fun.
Yeah.
And I
Awesome.
appreciate you exposing the book and myself to your audience. I'm easy to find. MikeWeinberg.com, WEINBERG. And on socials, it's Mike_Weinberg. And the books are all on Amazon. So thanks a
Awesome.
ton. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Mike, and all the best. We'll talk to you again soon.
Cheers.
Take care.